Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Welcome everybody to the Nebraska Cattlemen Producer Education webinar with Alliant Group. This evening, we're going to learn from Alliant Group Director Neil Shaw and former Secretary of Agriculture Mike Johans on how tax credits can help your business grow. They will also go over the current state of the ag industry, some legislative changes impacting farms, as well as tax credits and incentives for cattlemen. We look forward to you joining us over the next 45 minutes. We will go ahead and take questions after the presentation is over. So during that time, please type your questions in the Q&A box and we will respond to those questions via the presentation. Now I will turn it over to Neil and Mike.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very, very excited to present to you what I wanted to do right before I handed it over to former Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Johans. I just wanted to give a quick overview on Alliant Group. Really the idea of our conversation today is all about education and awareness. We want to make sure everyone understands the state of the industry as well as what incentives and credits are out there for you all to really help when it comes to tax liability mitigation, investing more in your business. Just a little bit about us as a firm. Alliant Group is not a CPA firm. All we do is work with businesses to help them claim 2 or 3 really powerful credits and incentives. To date, we've done these credits and incentives to the tune of over 50,000 times, delivering more than $10 billion back to American businesses. As you can see, our team is led by folks that all come from industry and are at the forefront of it all. I'm very, very excited to have former Secretary of Agriculture, former Governor of Nebraska, Mike Johans here with us, and he's going to share a little bit about where the industry is in a moment. But we also have former IRS commissioners, folks that come from the Senate Finance Committee as well. Our whole firm is predicated on making sure we're able to deliver valuable credits and incentives to you all. And most of these credits and incentives will be activities-based. So we have folks on staff that come from, backgrounds from animal health, agronomy, chemists, biologists. You can see on the left side on the enforcement, you can see Mark Everson, Steve Miller, Kathy, who are former IRS commissioners. On the right side, Dean and Don. And when you put everything together, we're able to help quantify and qualify and substantiate these powerful credits. The one we're speaking about today is called the R&D tax credit. A man that needs no introduction, but I'm so excited. I've had the pleasure of working with former Secretary Mike Johans for many years. As you all know, he was Secretary of Agriculture from 2005 to 2007, Governor of Nebraska from 1999 to 2005, also Senator. Secretary Johans has experience at every level, has managed federal agencies, really understands where the industry is going. What are the things that we can do to help educate owners and provide great value? And he's been so amazing to work with over the past 5-6 years, because really the way we're able to educate members of Nebraska as well as larger agribusinesses is through just an awareness of what's out there to help you guys reinvest and grow. Myself, I've worked in this incentive for about 10+ years. My background is on the engineering side and agricultural construction piece. And together, former Secretary Mike Johans and myself worked to really help Nebraska businesses claim these powerful credits. We're very excited because of the $10 billion that we've delivered to agribusinesses everywhere. Of that group, almost $800+ million is just to agribusinesses like yourselves. And really what I wanted to do at this point is turn the presentation over to Secretary Johan so he can give a little bit of an introduction to himself as well as a brief industry update.
Neil, thank you very much. It's great to be on this webinar. You know, I think, Neil, we need to start out and just proclaim out of all the webinars we've been doing, this is the best because it's with the best people in the country. And
Oh, yeah.
I've been looking forward to this one for many, many weeks. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes here and talk a little bit about what I see in the cattle industry over the next year. Maybe look out there a little bit further than that. But then I'm going to get us right back into the whole issue of the research and development tax credit and the benefit it has for agriculture. If I might just offer a quick word on that, I joined Alliant Group now a number of years ago, and we were just starting to get an ag practice started at Alliant Group. We had done work in agriculture, but we just knew that there was greater potential. And over the last few years, it's just been remarkable as we've talked to people about the importance of this credit and how well it works for agriculture. As you pointed out, we've been able to get about $800 million back to producers, processors, whatever. And that number is growing daily, weekly, monthly. It's very exciting to see. But now let me, as I said, talk a little bit about what I see in the cattle industry over the next year. I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit, and I'm going to say that 2021, especially in the second half of the year, I believe is going to be a better year. Before COVID kicked off, one of the last speeches I gave was in Northern Iowa to a group of producers. And, you know, I had no idea what was going to happen in terms of COVID. No one really did. And I said at the time that China needs protein. So there's going to be opportunities in 2020. Well, that was my last trip for about a year. Things shut down, COVID was everywhere, and it just turned the whole ag sector upside down. So 2021, you just have to imagine it's going to be a better year, but there's a couple of things that I want to point out. Cattle numbers are coming down, and that's going to put pressure on prices to be a bit higher. I don't see anything hugely dramatic there, but I do see strengthening prices as we work our way into the second half of 2021. And I think that's going to be pretty well across the board. I think that will be true for calves and feeders, fed cattle. I just think we're going to see a little better situation. There are some things, though, that I'm watching carefully. The first thing I'd mention is the pandemic. We're not through this yet. A lot of people have been vaccinated. You know, there's plenty of vaccine out there. A month or so from now, I think we'll have the vaccine we need to say to people, hey, we're ready for you. And in some states, we're seeing that already. But we still have a ways to go to get through the pandemic. The cattle numbers definitely are coming down a bit. Again, I would emphasize I don't see that as dramatic, but it's worth paying attention to. Probably indicates that we're at the start of a cycle here. The third thing that I'm paying attention to is drought. You look at the drought monitor, there is a lot of area out there in the United States that's very dry. And depending upon what happens there, that can have a pretty profound impact in terms of the cost of hay, pasture ground, could lead to some liquidation, although I do think that would be more regional. But I'm paying a lot of attention to drought. I know everyone else is too. The fourth thing I'm paying attention to is we're seeing some higher feed costs. And you know, I just checked the numbers today. Corn is right on the edge of $6 a bushel. 6 months ago, we probably never would have believed that I would be saying that at this point in 2021. Beans are right at $14 a bushel. So higher feed costs do have an impact, obviously. Probably is going to have the greatest impact just in terms of how we feed out cattle. But that's worth watching. If we have some dry weather in the Corn Belt where corn and soybeans are growing, it could have a pretty profound impact. Per capita consumption this year, experts seem to think it's going to be down some, but I'm going to add a piece to that I think we need to pay attention to, and that is China desperately needs protein. They lost about half of their swine herd. So they're in the market and they're buying huge quantities. So very, very definitely we're seeing positive impacts across the entire protein spectrum in this arena in China. Final thing I want to mention that I'm really paying attention to is labor shortages. I never thought we would see labor shortages in restaurants, hotels, et cetera, to the degree that we're seeing today. There are literally parts of the country where people can't find labor, and so restaurants are closing early, just simply because they've got to give the people who are working a break. The benefits that were passed in the stimulus bills, no doubt about it, were helpful. But the challenge it's creating now is this whole issue of whether it's literally a better situation to collect that versus working. And I think we're going to see some real challenges with labor shortages in 2021. So Neil, I took us on a path there to talk a little bit about the industry, but what I really am excited about tonight is talking about something that you and I are passionate about, and that's how do we get research and tax credits to people in the ag industry, and specifically Nebraska cattlemen. So let me turn it back to you, and we've got some slides we're going to go through, and then hopefully we'll have some questions.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Secretary Johans. And you're exactly right. A lot of the things that you mentioned about the industry, we're going to talk about today. These credits and incentives, everyone, are there to help with some of the issues and problems that arise every single year for Nebraska cattlemen members. We talk about labor shortages. We talk about the high price of feed. We talk about needing vets, nutritionists, folks to help us, right? Agronomists sometimes to help us with our business. And really the crux of the conversation today is going to be a little bit about a credit called the Research and Development Tax Credit. And when I say R&D, I think everyone's mind pretty much goes to the same spot, right? Most people, and Secretary Joanne, you let me know what you think too, but most people's mind goes to laboratory and test tubes, right? And I think whenever it comes to R&D, that's actually initially what the credit rewarded. The credit rewarded companies when Reagan passed it in 1981 that were only bringing things new to the world. And if you had to bring a product that was new to the world in the 80s and 90s, really only the companies that were using this R&D credit were the Fortune 100. The Fortune 100 were the only ones that had enough money to throw at patents, throw at new products that were the Fords, the GEs, the Pfizers, the Bayers of the world, right? But as the 80s and 90s progressed, I think all of us have seen this, but unfortunately, I mean, a lot of foreign competition hit the American marketplace. Folks started to outsource manufacturing, production, processing overseas. We started to move automotive manufacturing overseas in the late 80s. As the 90s progressed, we saw even more of it. IT solutions, processing, production, packaging. A lot of these industries started to move overseas just because, and this is something that you mentioned, Secretary Johans, the labor differences. It's cheaper to get labor and do things sometimes out of the US. And that did not sit right with Congress. It did not sit right that some of these jobs were moving overseas, industries were moving overseas. So in the early 2000s, Congress made a change. They got rid of this new to the world definition of the credit and said, let's make this a US business centric jobs credit. And the way they did that is they got rid of it and instead, the new to the world side, and instead said, as long as you're taking on projects or improvements to your business that are new to you as a company, you can qualify for this R&D credit. Now, that's a pretty broad statement, right, that I'm making, where new to you, what does that mean, Neil? And what I'd like to do over the next few slides is Secretary Johans and myself are going to go through the different industries that we see that can qualify, especially in the agribusiness community, but to get a little bit more granular when it comes to that. And really, when you look at the key reason why Congress expanded this credit was for agribusiness, manufacturing, software and technology. The idea behind this incentive and the reason why it's more generalized now is due to the fact that Congress wants folks to take advantage of this tax credit. It is permanent, so you can use it every single year forever, and it's a dollar for dollar reduction in the taxes you owe as owners.
Neil, you've mentioned some really important points that I'm going to highlight because I think they're key here.
Sure.
We hear so much these days about why can't Congress work together? Well, this is a perfect example of Congress getting it right. You're 100% correct. You know, if you look back at the Reagan years, this was pretty limited credit. And it really was those companies that had laboratories and people in white coats and test tubes and this, that, and the next thing. But Congress saw this was working. And in a very bipartisan way, they started to improve the credit. And so every president that has come to office has looked at opportunities to keep jobs here. We hear a lot about that. Let's keep jobs here. Let's keep research and technology and development right here in the United States. And what they turned to was the research and development tax credit. What was kind of overlooked in all of this, not because it didn't qualify, it absolutely did qualify, was agriculture. And I don't know why exactly, but it never popped up on the radar screen for most producers and processors, whatever folks involved in agriculture. Well, it fits hand in glove. I mean, it's a perfect fit. And when you point out that it just needs to be new to your operation, and that's it. That's the bullseye. That's how this works. Literally, what cattlemen are doing every single day in their operation qualifies for the research and development tax credit. And I'll just add one more thought on this. I want to point out again that this is a dollar for dollar credit. You figure out your tax owed, and then you apply the credit dollar for dollar to reduce your taxes. But if I might mention one other thing, Neil, that I know we'll talk a little more about, this actually goes back, so you can go back to your open tax years. You can go back 3 years, and you might say, well, Mike, I've been losing money and I don't think I can use this credit. Well, you can carry it forward 20 years. So literally, we can do the credit, establish it, and you can utilize that credit over 20 years. So, yep, there are some good years in the cattle business. There's some bad years, but the beauty about this is you can smooth those good years and bad years out by extending that credit for 20 years and looking back and claiming the credit when you didn't claim it in the 3 years previous. So those, Neil, I think are some very important points, and talk a little bit about what costs would qualify, and maybe we can focus a little bit on agriculture and how agriculture is such a perfect fit for this.
Sure, absolutely. And those are absolutely great points. You're right, Secretary Johans. What you all do day to day is actually what qualifies you for this credit. And the way we look at this R&D credit, the way Congress wants you to look at this R&D credit, is through three main buckets of eligible costs. We'll use, for example, a feed yard as example. The wages you pay yourself and your employees that are providing any input or recommendations to the yard, whether it be from an agricultural construction perspective, improvements to pens and bays, feed formulation, genetics, working and consulting with the nutritionist, that value-added input actually qualifies you for this credit. I know some of you may come back and say, Neil, Mike, I got to do that every single day for my business. That's what I have to do as a normal day to day. And that's good. That's what's really going to help you qualify for the credit. And what's interesting is what you pay yourself and your employees, you can actually capture and expense towards this credit. The second main bucket, I think this is a really big bucket of costs. Secretary Johans, you mentioned it's expensive to feed cattle, right? And you mentioned such an amazing portion of during the brief industry update that every year it gets more and more costly. The interesting piece is looking into the things that a lot of folks do in terms of cost of different health products, different vaccination protocols, implants. Every time you change feed formulation, all of these things actually help qualify those actual inputs to your operation towards this credit. You can expense those towards this credit and get part of that money back because you are trying new things, right? And then the third and final bucket, if you guys used, and I think a lot of folks do, outside consulting vets or nutritionists or agronomists, the costs you pay U.S. businesses that you consult with to help you improve your operation, you can also expense those. And what this means is this credit becomes a US-based jobs incentive that rewards businesses that continually invest and want to grow and try different things, and a lot of which you have to do anyway, right? Offers a little bit of a credit for that. And as Secretary Johans mentioned, you can go back 3 years from the time you file an original return to claim this credit. And it's been an overwhelming success. Both sides of the aisle are really, really passionate about keeping agribusinesses in the US, right? And rewarding you, offering opportunities to reinvest or grow or, buy new pieces of equipment or, look into more consultants to help, the agronomy side or, the health side, the herd health side, looking at different vaccination protocols that, folks are really, really behind this credit. And I don't know, Secretary Johans, if you wanted to add anything to that side of it.
Yeah, you've just raised many key points here, but let me summarize a couple of things that I was thinking about as you were talking. I was educated over and over again as I traveled across Nebraska as governor and as the United States Senator that the success of rural communities depends upon the success of our farmers and ranchers. It's as simple as that. So you might ask the question, well, why would Congress be interested in allowing agriculture to use a credit like this? Well, the answer to that is very simple. And as you pointed out, it's very, very bipartisan. We want to make sure that cattle are fed here, right here in Nebraska. We want to make sure that our processing is done right here in the state of Nebraska, in the United States. And I could go on and on. So these costs, for example, let's say you sit down with the nutritionist that you're working with, and the nutritionist says, we're not seeing the weight gain that we should be seeing from your cattle. So let's go to work on feed rations. Somebody's listening in out there and saying, well, that happens all the time. That's something that we're constantly working on, improving feed rations to improve weight gain or whatever else we want to achieve. Well, part of that, as you point out, can be expensed. It creates that credit. It creates that dollar for dollar offset on your tax return. So it gets back to where I started my comments. those dollars come back. Those dollars are invested in your operation, or they're invested in the community, or you hire 2 new people and there's more wages in that community. So it's no wonder why this has gotten such great bipartisan support. And every president that I ever worked with wanted to improve this. So when it started in the Reagan years, very limited. Now the language is very broad and accessible, and like I've said, it fits perfectly for agriculture.
And what I love about the incentive is, as it's broadened, there's so many different qualifying activities. I can't begin to cover every single one. And there's so many different industries that qualify, over 100 to 125 industries. Alliant Group works in, former Secretary Johannes, we work in together. And when it comes to the main qualifying areas as it relates to the Nebraska cattlemen, we see it in a lot of areas. This is not certainly all of them, but nutrition, health, genetics. When it comes to the lot layout, facility improvements that really seep into capital improvements, right? The farming itself, looking at different hybrids, varietals, soils, fertilizers, chemicals. All of these things are great and things that are done every single year. And a portion of those costs can be attributed towards this credit. And when we talk about feed yards, and this is something that's obviously very near and dear to us, there are so many different, and we're going to go through a couple industries over these few slides. There's so many different activities that can qualify. Analyzing performance factors, average daily gain, when you're examining daily feed intake, vaccination regimes, when you're looking to maintain or improve performance and health in cattle, evaluating disease. Secretary Johannes, I know you can speak to this really well, but vaccination protocols, things change in industry so rapidly, and yards and lots, sometimes there's time to get things up to speed, but that's time that you can expense, time and money you can expense towards this credit, right?
Yeah, this list is not attempting to be exhaustive. I mean, we just wanted to lay out a few things that in our experience, again, fit hand in glove with this research and development tax credit. So we've talked about feed rations. I haven't mentioned genetics yet, but you could talk to people in the industry and they'll tell you, I've been working on animal genetics for decades. My father before that, my grandfather before that. Of course, it's become more sophisticated like everything else. And the good news that we can deliver is, look, that qualifies. That's something that's going to work. But all of these other things, feed intake, vaccination protocols, all of that do qualify, because what you're doing is you're improving your operation. The language, as I've pointed out, is broad. It qualifies, and a certain portion of what you're doing, therefore, can be used to offset your tax liability. And Neil, I know you've seen this over and over again. I have also. One of the great joys of working in agriculture with Alliant Group is this money goes back to the local communities. It goes back to the operation. It invests right there to improve the operation, to put money into the community. So it's very rewarding to see. But again, I think if we attempted to list everything, we'd have to keep people on the line here for the next few hours. But this kind of illustrates what we're talking about, and it shows all of the things that we've worked on in the past, we'll continue to work on in the future that qualify for the research and development tax credit.
Yes, and one of the things I find so exciting, and when we talk about this with all of our different clients, I think Secretary Johannes and myself get really excited to talk about what this value could be, right? And what are yards getting in terms of this R&D credit? And when you look at feed yards, what's so exciting is the more that you spend on feed, the more that you spend on genetics, the more that you spend on the consulting side, the higher this credit. So we've seen, and I put just a few different case studies up. On the left, you can see revenue doesn't have too much bearing on this credit, but what does is the cattle that you have. And so you can see that about 18K head on feed will result in a $600,000 credit. 160,000 cattle can be 1.5 million in credits. And these are dollar for dollar credits. And by the way, there are 40 plus states that have an R&D credit too. So we can help offset state tax liability as well. There's a few yards that are in this 500K plus realm as well, almost about 8 million in credits. And these folks are doing the same thing that many, many yards, even if you have 2, 3, 4 head on feed, all the way up to 460,000. Developing different feed rations, evaluating disease, analyzing performance factors, trying to increase animal productivity. I mean, there's so many things that may qualify, and these numbers are just astounding. In each yard is so different. This is why Alliant Group exists. Secretary Johanns and myself help lead this practice that will quantify, qualify, and substantiate this credit on your behalf. And we're reviewing just what you produce as a normal course of business to isolate what the qualifying expenses are for you all. And this is money, as Secretary Johanns just mentioned. This is not a PPP. This is not an EIDL. You don't have to use this credit for any one specific purpose. But Congress's thought is, if it can offer some opportunity for you, if it can give you a little bit of leeway, whether it be to buy a new piece of equipment, to keep on folks on staff, to prepay, buy some feed a little bit earlier because you're expecting a really big year next year, then it's all the better. Then it's truly an investment credit for you all. And the greatest thing about this is it's not like those investment tax credits or anything like that. This is permanent. This is here to stay. Both sides of the aisle love this. And we only see it, and Secretary Jones, I think, just to talk a little bit about the future, we only see this expanding, right? I don't think the credit we look at this year will be the same as next year or the year after. I think Congress's real intent is to expand this thing and get every business booming here in the States.
Well, past history would educate us that in fact is exactly what has happened. It started out with Reagan with a pretty limited credit, and just every president that came along and every Congress in response improved the credit. As you pointed out, one of the significant improvements occurred in 2015. I believe it was with the PATH Act, and the credit was made permanent. It used to be before 2015, you had to go get it renewed every year. And thanks for putting that slide up. Now it's a permanent feature in the tax code. Mm-hmm. And I think you're 100% right. I think there's already, Neil, I can share with you, there's already ideas circulating about how this credit may be improved. And I think that's going to continue because the world is a very competitive place. And the one thing that we want to make sure is that our food supply is safe and secure. We don't want to rely on another country to feed our population. And so supporting agriculture does get that very broad bipartisan support. And whenever we're on Capitol Hill and talk to members about the importance of this credit, they get it. They understand it. They support it. And they're curious about what we can do or what they can do to improve the credit. So I think you're right. I think we'll see improvements to this over time. We've seen many in the last few decades, but I think it will only improve. It's a great investment in agriculture, and it's a great investment in making sure that our food supply is secure and it stays right here in the United States.
Think of this credit, everyone, as an anti-outsourcing, pro-business, pro-American business credit. You can see, as Secretary Johanns mentioned, the PATH Act in late 2015, early 2016 made this credit permanent. For companies that are under 50 million in sales, you can use this credit to take your tax down to basically zero. On top of that, the next act, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, also expanded this, made the credit even better. And then as global competition increases, the rest of the world becomes really industrialized, this is the tool. This one credit will be a major tool for Congress to make sure that these jobs stay here. We're feeding cattle here. We're row cropping here. And there's some great other industries that qualify as well. I think the Nebraska Cattlemen is such a great organization full of a lot of diverse members. When we talk, there are some feed yards and some folks that also have co-ops and farmers. So when we think about the potentially qualifying activities here, and please note, once again, this is not an exhaustive list, but performing soil and nutrient analysis, looking at precision ag techniques, looking at variable rate fertilizer apps, when you look at creating and experimenting custom nutrient pieces, even process improvements to increase efficiency. All of these things may be things you do day to day, but they really translate well and are qualified under the Internal Revenue Code and Section 41, also known as the R&D tax credit. We have seen row crop farmers, and this is a case study on a client of ours that's about 8,000 to 9,000 acres, qualifying for over 75,000 in federal credits. And they're doing things that other folks do every single year: experimentation on newer different fertilizers, new irrigation systems, improvements in harvesting equipment, etc. 50,000 acres, just as a benchmark, well over $300,000 in federal and state credits. And these are things like planting new crop types, looking at different, I know I mentioned this before, hybrids, varietals, test plots, working with university labs and test plots. There are so many different potentially qualifying activities. I think sometimes folks think, Secretary Johanns, that it's only trial work that qualifies, right? You got to be working with the University of Nebraska. You got to be working with some large experimental lab to qualify, but that's just not the case, right? I mean, there's a lot of activities folks do day to day that can qualify.
Very, very much not the case. Gosh, if you take one thing away from this presentation tonight, it would be that what you are doing every day, I feel very confident in saying that's going to qualify for the credit. The other thing that probably warrants saying and emphasizing is this is not a one and done credit. In other words, it's not a situation where you claim it and that wraps it up and you can't claim it again. This is available each and every year that you file a tax return. So don't for a minute think that what I did last year takes care of everything and I can't claim it in the future. Each year, as you innovate and improve and experiment with hybrids or try to improve your irrigation system, whatever it is, we would want to take a look at that and see how much of that is qualifying for the credit. And Neil, I know one of the things that you enjoy most and I enjoy most is working with a client on a relationship basis where we work with them over an extended period of time. And, nothing is more exciting than a client saying, gosh, I'm thinking about this expansion of my feedlot or whatever it is over the next 3 to 5 years. Will this credit be available? And can you work with me to make sure that we're doing the right things? And the answer to that is absolutely. That's one of the things that we find very, very exciting because, again, it encourages that investment back in that local community. And that's what this credit is all about, is keeping that investment here, keeping it local, creating jobs, making sure that the way we feed ourselves is right here in the United States.
Yep. And as we look at all the different industries, agribusiness is the main pillar of why this credit was expanded. Agricultural co-ops may be doing similar activities. I mean, determining nutrient composition, soil analyses, growing plans for each season. You can see a co-op around 90 million, the result is just astounding, over $250,000 in credits. And I can tell you that this client of ours actually used this to keep technical labor and some of their folks on staff, especially during the trying time that was last year. And we talk about labor shortages, finding the right folks. Sometimes labor costs a little bit more now. This credit can help offset that increase, and you maybe you're able to find more labor in your area with a little bit more capital. And the final piece we want to go through before fielding a few questions was cow-calf operations. There's so many different improvements and so many different things cow-calf operations are looking at in order to make sure that they stay ahead of the group. And new forage types, early wean projects, implementation of AI techniques, herd health considerations, rotational grazing, so many different things. And so, really the way we wanted to make sure we consult with you all is show you a little bit behind our process. I know we went through some of the folks that may qualify. The way that we work is pretty simple. With an initial conversation with you, we're able to understand a little bit about your business and let you know whether or not this will be, a really powerful incentive for you and what the potential value can be. And what we do is our process is as such, we'll go through and create a refined credit estimate by year in our first phase. In our second phase, we'll actually identify some of the different projects that you've taken on to improve your business and finalize the credit. And in the third phase, we'll actually provide you with reporting and final deliverable, all the things that are necessary to claim this credit. And using this process, we've helped thousands and thousands of businesses. And thankfully, a lot of them are agribusinesses. As Secretary Johans mentioned, this is our favorite organization to help serve. And we're very, very thankful to present in front of you. At this point, what I'd like to do, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. That's after the webinar. Those are both of our email addresses. I'll make sure I get this in Nebraska Cattlemen's hands too, so that they can send this out to everybody. Please reach out to Secretary Johans and myself. We love hearing from you, if anything, just to learn a little bit about your business. But at this point, I will actually pivot over to answering some of the questions that may have popped up.
Okay, again, about the questions, you can type them into the question and answer box. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. Just click on it and type your question in, and then that's how we will see it.
And then Secretary Johans, I don't know if I missed anything towards the end of that, or if there's anything you wanted to add.
I would like to add something while we're waiting to see if we have any questions. Very important point here, Neil. We are not accountants in terms of doing tax returns, in terms of that kind of work. We're not looking to replace anybody's financial officer or bookkeeper or anything of that nature. We come in very, very focused, specialize in this area specifically, and we work with your team. In fact, they are extremely important for us in terms of making sure that we get full value for the credit. So when you have accountants, we work with them. They become a partner in our efforts to maximize the credit for you. We seek their advice, their counsel. They provide the background information that we need. Same way with your bookkeeper. So I did want to emphasize to people, don't worry about that piece at all. Our focus is really on the credit and working in partnership with the people that are on your team, on your financial team.
Yeah, that's a great point, Secretary Johans. I think a lot of folks will say, now, Neil, what's Alliant Group's role? How do you work with us? Because I have an accountant. Shouldn't he or she be looking at this? And what's so crazy is there are 6,000 to 7,000 credits and deductions and depreciations and all these different things in the tax code. Alliant Group, Secretary Johans, myself, we work in 5, the most lucrative ones. And these all tend to be activities-based that require folks like ourselves that come from industry to help you take advantage of. So yeah, Secretary Johans mentioned we are not here to replace anyone. We're actually here to add to the business. And we're able to do so because we have unique perspective, not only with Secretary Johannes' expertise, my team of former agronomists, former nutritionists, et cetera, and then our IRS commissioners, but we're able to help you capture everything you can because of our unique expertise in some of these powerful credits. So we work hand in hand with your team to make sure we're able to do so. And if there are any questions, we'd love to answer them. And if not, no worries. I think what we'll do is we'll send out our contact information, Bonita and Talia, if we can make sure we get that to everybody. And that way, if you'd like a one-on-one conversation with us, we'd love the opportunity to learn about the business.
We have one question. Do you see it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So, and I love this question. What's the average size of a feedlot or a cow-calf operation that you work with? It's actually really interesting. I know in some of the case studies, we put up these companies that are a little bit all over the place in terms of size. Most of the companies we work with only have somewhere between 3,000 to 9,000 head. So these feedlots and feed yards, we're here to support mid to small size businesses. So the most piece or the most head-on feed for us will be that highest, 500,000 plus head, but most of them don't fall into that range.
Okay, we'll give one more call out for questions here.
One of the things I might mention as we're, again, waiting to see if there's another question, and the question really does get to a very, very important point, and that is we ask people not to self-censor. Somebody might be listening and say, well, I saw they had a really big feedlot there. I'm not that size. They won't be interested in me. Believe me, we are. And this credit works whether you are a smaller feedlot or a larger one. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Doesn't cost you anything to ask. We're not going to send you a bill if you call us and email us and ask the question, do you think I qualify? The important point is let us try to answer that question, and we've had great success in this area, and I have every reason to believe that success is going to continue.
Yep. And everything, like Secretary Johannes just mentioned, starts with a gratis assessment. As you mentioned, Secretary Johannes, the email to us to learn a little bit about your business is really to see if this would be a good fit for you, right? If the ROI would be there. And for us, our process only starts after we're able to show you, hey, this is what a yard of your size can gather. Is this something that you're interested in? And the analysis that we do up front, we're truly in this to help American businesses. So that upfront piece, all of understanding what these credits can look like is gratis. So we'd love to hear from you. Actually, we got a question that just came through. What is your cost? I love this question too. We actually work on a model that's very interesting. We only get compensated if we're able to find you credits. Our cost is a little variable, but it's always a small portion of the credits that we identify. So you're never upside down. And the interesting piece is, and this may actually flow into the next question, is the fee-based amount on the amount of the credit that we find in our work. Yes, it is. But our fees are always capped. So there is a time and place where we may not hit that cap, but either way, you will always get put in a position where you're cash flow positive. These credits will probably create cash refunds for you, and our fees will only.
Yeah, I think we may have lost Neil there, but let me wrap up what he was saying there, and that is that first of all, it doesn't cost anything to ask. That is a piece of the work that we do where we will tell you whether we believe you qualify or don't qualify, and you're not going to get a bill for that. Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, we're pretty turnkey when it comes to our process. We'll help you guys provide all the documentation, all the forms necessary to take advantage of it exactly the way the IRS is looking for. then Bonita and Talia, I don't know if I missed any questions, or me or Secretary Johannes missed any.
Those are the three. You answered the three that were in the chat box. So
Great. Well, Secretary Johannes, I don't know if there's anything else that we wanted to conclude with, or anything that I missed.
You have to wrap this up by saying, "Go Big Red." That's very important.
Indeed, go Big Red. And thank you so much. It is Secretary Johannes and my pleasure to really present to you guys. We love the group. I was telling Secretary Johannes just before, I spend most of my time off of 80, visiting the whole state in terms of the row cropping operations, the feedlots, walking through the yards, identifying what may or may not qualify hand in hand. We are a big face-to-face culture, so we'd love a chance to once again learn about the business and really share what this benefit could look like.
okay, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. This webinar was recorded and it will be up on our website along with Alliant Group's contact information. So if you go to nebraskacattlemen.org, it should be up tomorrow for you to revert back to and watch again if you missed any of the presentation tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.